The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the crumbling facade of the Asylum of Dr. Moreau. Once a symbol of medical advancement, it had become a monument to dread and mystery. The asylum's Gothic architecture loomed ominously, its spires piercing the twilight sky like fingers reaching out from a dark past. Inside, dust choked the air, swirling around with each gust of wind that whistled through shattered windows. The peeling wallpaper and rotting furniture hinted at the asylum's forgotten grandeur, now overrun with mold and decay. A chilling silence hung over the abandoned halls, broken only by the occasional scurry of a rat or the creak of a rusted door. Rebecca Sinclair, a seasoned paranormal investigator, stood at the threshold of the asylum, her breath misting in the cool evening air. She was flanked by her team, Nathan Brooks, a tech wizard whose skepticism was matched only by his prowess with ghost hunting equipment, Maria Fernandez, a fearless and compassionate medium, and Lydia Kane, a historian whose knowledge of the occult was as deep as it was unsettling. Rebecca turned to her team, her voice steady despite the cold creeping up her spine. "This is it, the Asylum of Dr. Moreau. We've read the reports. We know what happened here, but seeing it in person is another thing entirely." Nathan adjusted his equipment, his flashlight casting a beam that cut through the darkness like a knife. "I'm not sure what I'm expecting, but I bet it's not going to be pleasant. I've read the files, experiments, disappearances, and worse. This place is practically begging for a ghost hunter's nightmare." Maria's eyes, deep and reflective, scanned the surroundings with a mix of trepidation and determination. "The spirits here are restless, but they're not all malevolent. Some might just be lost, seeking closure. We need to approach this with caution." Lydia's gaze was focused on a weathered journal she held. The Journal of Dr. Moreau. It's said to be cursed, filled with accounts of experiments and dark rituals. "We should be careful. His legacy is said to linger in these walls." As they entered the asylum, the air grew colder, and the sense of unease intensified. The team set up their base in what had once been a grand waiting room, now a shell of its former self with furniture overturned and papers scattered. Nathan busied himself with setting up motion sensors and infrared cameras, while Maria performed a preliminary spiritual scan, her eyes closed in concentration. Suddenly, an eerie sound pierced the silence, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from within the walls themselves. Maria's eyes snapped open, and she turned to Rebecca. "We're not alone. There's something here." Rebecca's face hardened. "Let's stay focused. We need to gather as much evidence as possible before we make any judgments." The team proceeded deeper into the asylum, their footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. They passed by cells with rusting bars and examination rooms, where the shadows seemed to dance on the walls. Lydia was absorbed in deciphering the faded inscriptions and symbols scrawled across the walls, her face pale as she translated the cryptic messages. "Dr. Moreau's experiments weren't just medical," Lydia said, her voice trembling slightly. "He was delving into the occult, trying to bridge the gap between our world and something far darker." The atmosphere grew heavier as they approached the asylum's old surgical wing, a place where the walls seemed to pulsate with a malevolent energy. Rebecca's flashlight caught sight of something unsettling, an old photograph of a man with a twisted, malicious grin. The caption read, "Dr. Moreau, the Master of Shadows." Rebecca felt a shiver run down her spine. "Let's keep moving. We need to stay alert and keep our wits about us." The team continued their exploration, unaware of the lurking danger that awaited them in the heart of the asylum. Little did they know, their night was about to take a horrifying turn as the shadows of the past began to awaken, eager to claim new victims. The abandoned hospital where Rebecca Sinclair and her team had set up their base was far from welcoming. Its corridors were silent save for the occasional drip of water from a leaky ceiling. Despite the desolation, the team bustled with a focused energy, preparing for their most daunting investigation yet. Rebecca surveyed the scene with a mixture of determination and anxiety. Her team, consisting of Nathan Brooks, Maria Fernandez, and Lydia Kane, was busy unpacking and setting up their equipment. Nathan was immersed in calibrating the various devices: electromagnetic field meters, thermal cameras, and audio recorders, while Maria carefully laid out her spiritual tools: crystals, candles, and a smudging bundle of sage. Lydia, surrounded by stacks of ancient books and documents, was mapping out the asylum's layout based on her research. Nathan glanced up, his face partially obscured by the glow of his laptop. "All systems go, Rebecca. I've got everything hooked up and ready to roll. If there's any supernatural activity, we'll catch it." Rebecca nodded. "Good work, Nathan. Maria, how are you feeling about the energy here?" Maria took a deep breath, her eyes closed in meditation. "It's definitely heavy. I'm picking up on a lot of unsettled spirits, but nothing too specific yet. We'll need to conduct a full sweep to get a clearer picture." Lydia joined them, clutching an old ledger filled with notes and illustrations. "I've been going through Moreau's research. His experiments were bizarre, to say the least. He didn't just play with science, he dabbled in ancient rites. There are references to entities that go beyond our usual hauntings: skinwalkers, crawlers, and other horrors." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Great. So not only are we dealing with ghosts, but also with things that might not even follow the rules of physics. Just what I wanted." Maria gave him a reassuring smile. "Stay positive. We're prepared for anything. And besides, we've got each other." Rebecca agreed, though her mind was preoccupied with the gravity of their mission. "All right, team. Let's focus on getting a baseline reading of the asylum. We'll start with the areas most affected by the paranormal activity, according to the reports, especially the surgical wing and the old records room." As they made their way to the surgical wing, the atmosphere seemed to thicken with an almost palpable sense of dread. The decrepit corridor stretched before them, lined with abandoned examination rooms and rusted medical equipment. The flicker of their flashlights cast eerie shadows on the walls, heightening the sense of unease. Nathan's voice broke the silence. "I'm getting some unusual readings here. Higher EMF levels than expected. It could be a sign of a strong presence." Rebecca's flashlight caught the remnants of old surgical tools. Their grotesque shapes a stark reminder of the asylum's grim history. "Stay alert. We're in the heart of the most disturbing part of this place." Lydia, trailing behind, paused to examine a series of arcane symbols etched into the wall. These symbols, they're not just random. They were used in rituals to bind or summon entities. Moreau was trying to manipulate forces beyond comprehension. Maria's face was a mask of concentration as she set up her equipment. "The spirits are getting restless. I can sense their agitation growing." As the team continued their investigation, the sense of unease grew heavier. Strange noises echoed through the asylum: distant thumps, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, and an unexplainable chill that ran down their spines. Rebecca's gaze was sharp as she took in the surroundings. "We need to stay focused and keep communication clear. This place is far from ordinary, and if we let our guard down, it could turn dangerous quickly." The team worked diligently, their movements careful and calculated. The asylum's oppressive darkness seemed to press in on them from all sides, a constant reminder of the dangers lurking just out of sight. Little did they know, their initial investigation was only the beginning of a night fraught with terror, as the shadows of the past began to stir, eager to reclaim their own. The surgical wing of the Asylum of Dr. Moreau was a place frozen in time. The stench of decay clung to the air, mingling with the faint metallic tang of rusted medical instruments. The team's footsteps echoed through the corridor, each step amplifying their sense of isolation. Rebecca led the way, her flashlight casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. Nathan was a few steps behind, hunched over his laptop, scrutinizing the data from his equipment. Maria and Lydia followed, their expressions tense and alert. Rebecca turned to her team. "Remember, we're looking for anything out of the ordinary. The readings Nathan's getting suggest strong activity here, so let's stay sharp." Nathan nodded, his eyes focused on the EMF meter. "I'm picking up high electromagnetic fields in this area. It's consistent with strong paranormal activity, but it could also mean other anomalies. Maria raised a hand, her face pale. I'm feeling something. It's cold and oppressive. It's like a pressure on my chest. Before anyone could respond, a chilling draft swept through the corridor, causing the temperature to plummet. The team's breath became visible, swirling in the frigid air. Rebecca shivered despite her best efforts to stay composed. Lydia, clutching her flashlight, scanned the room. The symbols we saw earlier were supposed to contain entities. If they're breaking free. Her words were cut off by a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The sound was deep and menacing, echoing with a terrifying resonance. Nathan's equipment went haywire, flashing warnings and emitting shrill beeps. Rebecca's flashlight flickered, casting erratic patterns on the walls. Everyone get ready. Something's here. Suddenly, the growl turned into a horrifying screech as a grotesque figure emerged from the darkness. A crawler. It had long, spindly limbs and a face that was little more than a cavernous maw, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The creature moved with a nightmarish speed, its limbs contorting in impossible ways. Maria screamed as the crawler lunged toward them, its gaping mouth opening wide in a grotesque parody of a scream. Lydia stumbled backward, her eyes wide with terror. Nathan's attempt to fend off the creature with a UV light seemed to have little effect, the light barely penetrating the crawler's shadowy form. Rebecca grabbed a flashlight and swung it at the creature, trying to distract it. Move. Get to cover. The team scattered, trying to avoid the crawler's flailing limbs. Nathan was thrown against the wall, the impact knocking the wind out of him. Maria, her hands trembling, managed to get a few protective symbols drawn on the ground, hoping to create a barrier. Rebecca and Lydia fought off the crawler with their equipment. Lydia threw a vial of salt, and the creature recoiled momentarily, but it quickly regained its aggression. Rebecca's flashlight flickered with an eerie intensity as she swung it again, narrowly missing the crawler's snapping jaws. Nathan, gasping for breath, pulled himself up and grabbed a heavy iron rod from an old surgery table. With a cry of determination, he swung it at the crawler, striking it with a forceful blow. The creature screeched in agony, its form beginning to waver and dissipate. Maria chanted protective prayers, her voice steady despite her visible fear. Slowly, the crawler's form began to dissolve, its terrifying growls fading into the distance. The air grew warmer as the oppressive presence receded. Rebecca, her face pale but resolute, checked on her team. Is everyone okay? Nathan, bruised but alive, gave a shaky nod. I'm fine. That thing was horrific. We need to regroup and figure out how to deal with these entities. Maria, still shaken, added, It's only going to get worse. If this was just the beginning, we need to be prepared for whatever comes next. Lydia, adjusting her glasses, looked at the fading traces of the crawler. Dr. Moreau's experiments have unleashed something far darker than we anticipated. We have to stay vigilant. As the team regrouped and tended to their wounds, the asylum's shadows seemed to close in around them, their presence a constant reminder of the dangers lurking just beyond their sight. The atmosphere in the Asylum of Dr. Moreau's surgical wing remained thick with dread long after the crawler had vanished. The team, bruised but resolute, took a moment to regroup and recover from their harrowing encounter. Rebecca Sinclair paced the room, her mind racing through the implications of their first brush with malevolence. All right, let's focus, Rebecca said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping up her spine. We need to understand what we're dealing with if we're going to make it out of here alive. Nathan, his shirt stained with sweat and grime, was poring over the readings from his equipment. The EMF levels are still off the charts. This place is saturated with paranormal energy. If Dr. Moreau's experiments left any residue, it's here. Maria, her hands still trembling from the encounter, was attempting to calm herself with deep breaths. I felt something more than just the crawler. There's a profound sense of anguish and rage here, like the spirits are trapped and desperate. Lydia, meanwhile, had been sifting through the old documents they'd brought from the asylum's records room. Her face was illuminated by the flickering light of a candle as she studied a leather-bound journal, its cover worn and cracked. This journal belonged to Dr. Moreau. It's filled with cryptic notes and diagrams, many of which refer to entities and rituals. Rebecca joined Lydia, her gaze fixed on the ancient journal. What does it say? Lydia carefully turned the pages, her eyes widening as she read aloud. According to Moreau's notes, he was obsessed with transcending human limitations. He conducted experiments designed to bridge our world with other dimensions, specifically those inhabited by entities like skinwalkers and crawlers. He believed these entities could grant him power and knowledge beyond human comprehension. Nathan leaned in, his curiosity piqued. So Moreau wasn't just a mad scientist. He was dabbling in interdimensional necromancy. No wonder this place is crawling with horrors. Maria, still visibly shaken, added, "If the entities were bound here, it explains why they're so aggressive. They were never meant to be free, and now they're lashing out in desperation." Rebecca looked at the team, her expression grim. "We need to find a way to stop these entities from crossing over. According to the journal, there's a ritual to bind them again, but it involves a series of old symbols and artifacts." Lydia pointed to a map sketched in the journal. Moreau described a ritual chamber hidden deep within the asylum. "It's marked here, an underground vault, probably where he conducted his most dangerous experiments." The team set off in the direction indicated on the map, their progress slow and cautious. As they navigated through the labyrinthine corridors of the asylum, the oppressive atmosphere seemed to thicken with every step. The air was filled with an almost tangible sense of foreboding. They arrived at a heavy metal door at the end of a narrow hallway. The door was partially ajar, revealing a staircase leading down into darkness. Lydia's flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls as they descended into the abyss. The underground vault was a large, dimly lit room, its walls adorned with strange symbols and occult diagrams. In the center of the room was an altar covered in dust, surrounded by remnants of old rituals, candles, bones, and faded parchment. Rebecca turned to the team, her voice low and urgent. "This is it, the heart of Moreau's experiments. We need to search this room thoroughly. Look for anything that might help us complete the binding ritual and stop these entities from causing further chaos." As they began their search, the feeling of being watched grew more intense. The air seemed to crackle with latent energy, and every creak and groan of the asylum's old structure sounded like a sinister whisper. Rebecca's eyes narrowed as she examined the symbols on the walls. "We're running out of time. Whatever we're looking for, it has to be here." The team worked diligently, their senses heightened and their nerves frayed. The secrets of the asylum were about to be revealed, but the looming threat of the entities and the shadow of Dr. Moreau's dark legacy was a constant reminder that their battle was far from over. The underground vault was an unsettling tableau of dark symbols and ritualistic relics. As Rebecca Sinclair and her team delved deeper into their search, the atmosphere seemed to grow denser, almost as if the very shadows of the room were alive. The oppressive feeling of being watched only intensified as they worked, the silence occasionally punctuated by the distant, echoing groans of the asylum. Nathan Brooks was hunched over a dusty old book, its pages filled with intricate diagrams and ancient text. "I think I've found something. This book mentions a shadow man, an entity that can manipulate shadows and prey on fear. Sounds like our kind of problem." Rebecca, who was examining the symbols on the walls, looked up with a mixture of concern and determination. If Moreau was trying to summon or control such a being, it could explain the disturbances we've been experiencing. We need to be prepared for anything. Maria Fernandez was arranging protective symbols around the room, her fingers moving quickly despite her lingering fear. "I can already feel its presence. It's like a cold, creeping sensation crawling up my spine." Lydia Kane, reading through Moreau's journal, suddenly paused. "There's a mention of a ritual that involves invoking the Shadow Man. It requires a specific sequence of symbols to either bind or banish it. We need to find these symbols and perform the ritual to stop it. As the team gathered around the altar, preparing for the ritual, the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance and writhe on the walls. The temperature dropped sharply, and a chill filled the room, making their breath visible in the dim light. Suddenly, the shadows on the walls began to coalesce into a dark, indistinct form. A figure cloaked in darkness with eyes that glowed an unsettling red. The Shadow Man had arrived. Its presence was palpable, the air around it thick with an oppressive malevolence. Rebecca's flashlight revealed the creature's twisted, shadowy form. It moved with unnatural fluidity, its limbs elongating and contorting as it glided toward them. The very shadows seemed to obey its command, shifting and changing shape at its will. "Everyone get ready," Rebecca shouted, trying to keep her voice steady. "We need to complete the ritual before it overpowers us." Nathan scrambled to set up a high-intensity UV light, hoping to weaken the Shadow Man. "I've got the light ready. It should disrupt its form, but we'll need to keep it focused." Maria began chanting protective incantations, her voice trembling but determined. Lydia, working quickly, arranged the symbols and artifacts according to the instructions in Moreau's journal. The Shadow Man let out a chilling, hollow laugh that echoed off the walls, its form shifting as it attempted to engulf the room in darkness. "You cannot stop me," it intoned, its voice a mixture of static and whispers. As the ritual symbols began to glow with a faint, otherworldly light, the Shadow Man's attacks grew more frantic. It lashed out with tendrils of darkness, trying to snuff out the light and disrupt the ritual. Nathan, with sweat pouring down his face, adjusted the UV light's angle, creating a blinding beam that forced the Shadow Man to recoil. "It's working. Keep going." Maria's chants grew louder, more urgent, her voice almost breaking as she fought to maintain focus. "We're almost there. Just a little longer." Lydia, her hands shaking, completed the final arrangement of symbols. The ritual's energy began to intensify, the symbols glowing brighter and pushing back against the encroaching darkness. With a final desperate roar, the Shadow Man was pushed back, its form dissipating into the shadows from which it came. The oppressive darkness lifted, and the temperature in the room slowly returned to normal. Rebecca took a deep breath, her heart still racing. "Is everyone all right?" The team, exhausted but relieved, nodded in response. "We did it," Lydia said, wiping her brow. "But this isn't over. There are more entities here, and we need to be ready." As they gathered their equipment and prepared to leave the vault, the unsettling feeling that they were not alone lingered. The asylum's malevolent energy was still palpable, a reminder that their battle against the dark forces of Dr. Moreau's legacy was far from finished. The tension in the asylum had reached a boiling point. Rebecca Sinclair and her team, still reeling from their encounter with the Shadow Man, were caught in the midst of a labyrinthine nightmare that seemed to stretch endlessly. Their success in repelling the Shadow Man had been a temporary respite, but the atmosphere remained thick with malevolent energy. Just as they were beginning to regroup and reassess their strategy, the oppressive silence of the asylum was broken by the roar of an engine. A military-grade SUV, marked with the insignia of a covert government agency, screeched to a halt outside the asylum's main entrance. Rebecca's eyes narrowed as she watched the SUV's headlights pierce through the darkness. Great, just what we needed. More government intervention. Nathan, still recovering from the earlier confrontation, glanced at Rebecca with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Whoever they are, they're not here for a friendly visit. The SUV's doors swung open, and a team of well-equipped operatives emerged, their faces obscured by tactical gear and night vision goggles. Leading the group was Agent Frank Wilson, a no-nonsense operative known for his expertise in high-risk situations. By his side was Sarah King, a seasoned paramedic, and John Blake, a former military tracker with a reputation for handling extreme scenarios. Agent Wilson approached Rebecca with a commanding presence. "Sinclair, I'm Agent Wilson. We've been monitoring the situation here and decided to intervene. We've got reports of serious disturbances and casualties." Rebecca's gaze was sharp. We appreciate the concern, but we're handling this. The asylum is crawling with entities, shadow people, crawlers, you name it. We're already deep in the middle of this mess. Agent Wilson nodded curtly. We're here to provide support and ensure that things don't escalate further. Sarah will be on standby for medical emergencies, and John and I will help with containment and extraction. Rebecca, begrudgingly acknowledging the need for extra help, relented. All right, but stay out of our way unless absolutely necessary. We've got a plan, and we don't want any interference. The new team quickly set up their own equipment, including advanced surveillance systems and high-powered weapons designed to deal with supernatural threats. Sarah King immediately began inspecting the injured team members, her professional demeanor a reassuring presence amidst the chaos. As the combined teams prepared to delve deeper into the asylum, Lydia Kane approached Agent Wilson with a folder of documents. We've uncovered a significant amount of information about Dr. Moreau's experiments. He was trying to summon and control various entities from other dimensions. Agent Wilson took the folder and flipped through the documents. We've heard rumors, but nothing concrete. The government wants to know what we're dealing with, and we're here to make sure it's contained. The combined teams made their way back to the ritual chamber, their progress cautious but determined. The eerie silence of the asylum was occasionally interrupted by the creaks and groans of its dilapidated structure. John Blake, using his tracking skills, led the group through a series of dark, winding corridors. His keen senses picked up on subtle signs of recent activity: scratches on the walls, disturbed dust, and faint, unsettling noises. As they entered a particularly dark and ominous corridor, a chilling draft swept through, causing the team to shiver involuntarily. Sarah's paramedic kit was at the ready, and the team kept their weapons close. Suddenly, a violent rattle shook the corridor, and the lights flickered erratically. A sinister presence made itself known, a pack of skinwalkers, their forms shifting and twisting into grotesque imitations of humanity. Agent Wilson sprang into action, his team providing cover fire with specialized weaponry. The skinwalkers attacked with terrifying speed, their distorted faces and elongated limbs making them nearly impossible to predict. The ensuing battle was fierce and chaotic. The government operatives fought bravely, their training evident in their disciplined responses. Sarah worked quickly to tend to the wounded, her calm efficiency a stark contrast to the chaos around her. Rebecca, fighting alongside the operatives, realized that the situation was more dire than anticipated. The asylum's dark forces were not only resisting their efforts, but actively fighting back. The stakes were higher than ever, and the combined team faced a battle for their very survival. As the dust began to settle and the last of the skinwalkers were driven back, Rebecca took a moment to catch her breath. The asylum was still far from safe, and their fight against the dark legacy of Dr. Moreau was far from over. Lydia looked up, her face illuminated by the dim glow of her flashlight. There's something here that might give us a significant advantage. Moreau's notes refer to a forgotten laboratory, a hidden facility where his most dangerous experiments were conducted. It's described as being beneath the asylum, accessible through a concealed hatch. Agent Wilson, who had been reviewing security footage on a portable monitor, nodded in agreement. We've encountered similar references in the intelligence we've gathered. If there's a way to stop or contain the entities, it's likely in that lab. Rebecca, her resolve hardening, took charge. Then that's where we need to go. We'll follow the clues and locate this laboratory. Everyone stay alert. We've already seen what kind of horrors this place can unleash. The team set out, their footsteps echoing as they moved through the decaying halls. Lydia guided them with a combination of the journal's clues and her intuition. They eventually arrived at a large, rusted door partially obscured by debris. The door's ancient metal seemed to hum with latent energy. John Blake, ever the tracker, examined the door. This looks like it hasn't been touched in decades. If the laboratory is through here, we need to be careful. Nathan pulled out a crowbar, and with a few determined tugs, managed to pry the door open. The hinges groaned in protest, revealing a dark, musty stairwell descending into the abyss. As the team descended, the air grew colder, the silence more profound. The stairwell seemed to stretch endlessly, each step echoing ominously. At the bottom, they reached another door, this one made of reinforced steel, its surface marked with strange symbols. Rebecca took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The sight before them was both awe-inspiring and horrifying. The laboratory was an expansive, dimly lit chamber, filled with old machinery, broken glass, and scattered papers. The walls were lined with shelves containing faded documents and eerie, unidentifiable artifacts. In the center of the room was an examination table, still adorned with rusting restraints. Around it, a complex array of old-fashioned scientific equipment was juxtaposed with occult symbols. It was clear that Moreau had blended science and dark magic in his experiments. Maria, her voice trembling, began to speak. "This place, it's like a shrine to madness. The energy here is intense. We need to be cautious." Nathan started setting up equipment to scan for any remaining supernatural disturbances. "I'm getting some strange readings here, off the charts. This lab is a hotbed of paranormal activity." Rebecca approached a large, dusty ledger on a nearby table. "Let's see if this provides any insight. We need to understand Moreau's final experiments. If there's a way to reverse or mitigate the damage, it's in here." As she flipped through the ledger, a sudden sharp noise echoed through the laboratory. A heavy thump followed by a guttural growl. The temperature dropped sharply, and shadows seemed to coil and twist, becoming more animated and menacing. Rebecca's heart raced. "Everyone get ready. We've stirred something up. The lab may be hiding more than just old experiments." The team braced themselves, ready for whatever horrors lurked in the dark corners of the forgotten laboratory. The asylum's secrets were far from exhausted, and the true extent of Dr. Moreau's dark legacy was beginning to reveal itself. As the shadows grew thicker and the temperature plummeted further, they knew the real battle was just beginning. The forgotten laboratory, with its darkened corners and unsettling aura, seemed to pulse with an almost sentient malevolence. The team, armed with their equipment and fortified by a grim determination, moved cautiously through the room, each member acutely aware of the mounting tension. Rebecca Sinclair's flashlight illuminated the ledger she was examining. Its pages, filled with Moreau's meticulous handwriting, revealed horrifying details of the experiments conducted in this forsaken place. The documents hinted at a ritual so complex and dangerous that it could either bind or release the entities Moreau had sought to control. "Look at this," Rebecca said, holding up the ledger for the team to see. Moreau's final experiment involved a multi-phase ritual that required several components: rare artifacts, specific symbols, and a precise alignment of energies. If we want to put a stop to this, we'll need to complete or counteract this ritual. Nathan, his eyes scanning the room with the help of his EMF reader, nodded. "We need to find these components. Moreau must have left them here somewhere. The intensity of the readings suggests that the ritual was either recently performed or is still in progress." Maria, who had been quietly examining a series of symbols on the walls, looked up. "I'm getting a strong feeling from these symbols. They're meant to channel and amplify supernatural energies. If we can decipher their arrangement, it might help us understand how to counteract Moreau's spell." John Blake, ever the practical one, was rummaging through drawers and cabinets, searching for any artifacts or unusual objects. "Anything in here might be relevant. We should leave no stone unturned." The team spread out, each member meticulously searching their assigned area. Lydia's expertise was crucial as she analyzed the symbols and compared them to the information in the ledger. As she worked, she found a hidden compartment behind a loose brick in the wall. Inside were several old, intricately designed artifacts, symbols, amulets, and what appeared to be fragments of ceremonial robes. "Guys, I think I've found some of the artifacts we need," Lydia said, her voice tinged with excitement. "These might be key to completing or reversing the ritual." Rebecca joined Lydia, examining the artifacts with a critical eye. Great find. We need to arrange these according to the instructions in the ledger. It looks like the ritual requires a specific layout. As they worked to set up the artifacts, the temperature in the room continued to drop. The oppressive feeling of being watched grew more intense. Shadows seemed to lengthen and shift, almost as if they were reacting to the team's actions. Suddenly, the room was filled with an eerie, otherworldly howl. The shadows coalesced into a dense, swirling mass, from which emerged a new, more menacing entity, a shadowy figure with a grotesque, contorted face and glowing eyes. It was clear that the Shadow Man was not finished. It had been waiting for its chance to strike again. "Everyone get ready," Rebecca shouted. "It's the Shadow Man again. It's using the energy from the ritual." Nathan quickly adjusted the UV light, aiming it at the new entity. The light should help weaken it, but we need to finish setting up the ritual before it overwhelms us. Maria and Lydia worked frantically to complete the ritual's setup. As they placed the last artifact and traced the final symbol, a shimmering barrier began to form around them, pushing back against the encroaching shadows. The Shadow Man roared in frustration, its form writhing and distorting as it attempted to breach the barrier. The team's combined efforts began to stabilize the ritual, and the oppressive energy in the room began to shift. Rebecca focused on maintaining the ritual's alignment, her hands steady despite the chaos. "We're almost there. Just keep pushing." The Shadow Man's attacks grew more desperate, but the barrier held firm. With a final, explosive burst of energy, the ritual's power surged, and the entity was driven back into the shadows from which it had emerged. The room's temperature began to normalize, and the oppressive feeling gradually dissipated. The team, exhausted but relieved, surveyed the now quiet laboratory. The ritual had been a success, but they knew their battle was far from over. The asylum's dark secrets were still lurking, and the legacy of Dr. Moreau was only partially understood. They needed to be prepared for whatever came next, as the true extent of Moreau's experiments was still shrouded in darkness. The forgotten laboratory was now eerily quiet, save for the soft hum of the remaining equipment and the occasional distant groan of the asylum's old structure. The successful containment of the Shadow Man had provided a temporary reprieve, but the team knew that the true core of Dr. Moreau's dark experiments still awaited them. Rebecca Sinclair and her team, weary but undeterred, regrouped to plan their next move. The unsettling silence of the laboratory was a stark contrast to the chaotic energy they had just faced. "Okay, we managed to push back the Shadow Man," Rebecca said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "But this is only part of the puzzle. We need to find out where Moreau conducted the final phases of his experiments. There's a chance the answers, and the remaining threats, are deeper within the asylum." Nathan Brooks, still monitoring the readings from his equipment, looked up. "The EMF levels are fluctuating, but there's a strong signal coming from beneath us. It might indicate a deeper chamber or facility. If Moreau's final experiments were conducted in a hidden location, it's probably accessed from below." Maria Fernandez, her face pale but resolute, added, "The atmosphere here is heavy with residual energy. If there are more entities, they're likely to be more aggressive. We need to be prepared for anything." Agent Frank Wilson, whose team had already begun setting up additional security measures, nodded in agreement. "We'll accompany you. Our team is equipped for high-risk scenarios, and we've got medical support on standby." The team followed the clues in Moreau's journal, which pointed to an even deeper level of the asylum. They retraced their steps to the main hall and found a concealed staircase hidden behind a large, rotting tapestry. The staircase led down into darkness, with each step echoing ominously. As they descended, the air grew colder and the atmosphere more oppressive. At the bottom, they reached a heavy, reinforced steel door, covered in symbols and chains. Rebecca, with the help of Nathan and John Blake, managed to pry the door open. Beyond the door lay a cavernous chamber, dimly lit by flickering torches embedded in the walls. The room was filled with ancient, rusting machinery, strange devices, and arcane symbols etched into the floor. In the center was a large, ornate altar, its surface covered in dried blood and old yellowed parchments. "This must be the heart of Moreau's experiments," Lydia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The altar is likely where he conducted his most dangerous rituals." As the team approached the altar, a sudden, bone-chilling draft swept through the chamber. The temperature dropped sharply, and an eerie, low growl filled the air. Shadows began to coalesce, forming into multiple figures: crawlers, shadowy entities, and twisted apparitions. The new threats were more numerous and aggressive than before. The team sprang into action, with Agent Wilson's team providing cover fire and Sarah King preparing for any medical emergencies. The paranormal investigators, meanwhile, used their specialized equipment to counteract the entities. Rebecca, fighting off a crawler with her flashlight, called out, "Nathan, adjust the UV lights. We need to create a barrier." Nathan quickly repositioned the lights, casting a blinding beam that pushed back the crawling entities. Lydia and Maria worked to reinforce the symbols on the floor, trying to create a protective barrier around the altar. Despite their efforts, the entities continued to press forward, their attacks becoming more desperate. The chamber's atmosphere was thick with dark energy, making it difficult to concentrate. Rebecca glanced at the altar and realized that it held a key component of Moreau's final experiment: a large, blood-stained tome bound in dark leather. The book. It's crucial to understanding what Moreau did. We need to secure it. John Blake managed to reach the altar amidst the chaos and grabbed the tome. As he did, the chamber shook violently, and a deafening roar filled the air. The remaining entities seemed to merge into a massive, shadowy form, even more terrifying than before. With renewed determination, Rebecca and her team fought fiercely, their combined efforts pushing the entities back. The tome was essential to deciphering the final pieces of Moreau's dark legacy, and they needed to hold their ground until they could make sense of its contents. As the last of the entities were driven back into the shadows, the team took a moment to catch their breath. The chamber was still, but the danger was far from over. The true extent of Dr. Moreau's dark experiments was now within their grasp, and the final chapter of their ordeal was approaching. The oppressive silence of the chamber was almost a relief after the chaos they had endured. Rebecca Sinclair and her team, battered but resolute, stood amidst the remnants of their confrontation with the shadowy entities. The blood-stained tome lay on the altar, its dark leather cover a stark reminder of the horrors they had faced. Rebecca approached the tome, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for it. This book holds the key to ending Moreau's nightmare once and for all. We need to decipher it and complete the final ritual to secure this place. Lydia Kane, her eyes scanning the faded text, began to read aloud. The book describes a complex ritual designed to seal the dimensional rift that Moreau opened. It involves an ancient incantation and the use of the artifacts we found earlier. Nathan Brooks, adjusting his equipment, added, "The EMF levels are still high. If the rift isn't sealed properly, we could face even more aggressive entities." Sarah King, still on standby with her medical kit, prepared for any potential injuries or emergencies. "Let's get this done quickly. We need to finish the ritual and get out of here before the situation deteriorates further." Agent Frank Wilson, his face showing signs of exhaustion, set up additional security measures. "We'll hold the perimeter. If any more entities try to breach the chamber, we'll deal with them. Just focus on completing the ritual." Rebecca and Lydia, working in tandem, arranged the remaining artifacts around the altar according to the instructions in the tome. The chamber's atmosphere seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment, the dark energy palpable. As they began the incantation, the symbols on the floor glowed with an eerie, otherworldly light. The room's temperature fluctuated wildly, and the oppressive presence of the asylum's dark forces grew more intense. A low, rumbling growl resonated through the chamber, and the shadows on the walls began to writhe and twist. The entities, sensing the culmination of the ritual, grew more frantic in their attacks. Crawlers and shadowy figures emerged from the darkness, their forms shifting and elongating as they charged at the team. John Blake, armed with a high-powered flashlight and defensive gear, fought back the encroaching entities. We need to hold them off. Rebecca, how much longer? Rebecca, her voice steady despite the mounting pressure, continued the incantation. We're almost there. Just a few more steps. As the ritual reached its climax, a blinding light erupted from the altar, pushing back the dark entities. The symbols on the floor burned with a fierce, purifying energy, and the shadows recoiled, their forms distorting and shrinking away. The rift, a swirling vortex of darkness, began to close as the energy from the ritual sealed it shut. The entities, caught in the process, were drawn back into the void from which they had come, their screams echoing faintly before being silenced. The chamber's temperature stabilized, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The shadows receded, leaving behind only the remnants of the dark forces that had plagued the asylum. Rebecca, Lydia, and the rest of the team breathed a collective sigh of relief as the final incantation concluded. The tome's dark energy dissipated, leaving behind only the faint, reassuring glow of the symbols they had used. Agent Wilson, surveying the now quiet chamber, approached Rebecca. Good work. The rift is sealed, and the immediate threat is neutralized. We'll take over from here and ensure the asylum is properly secured. Rebecca nodded, her exhaustion evident. Thank you, Agent Wilson. We couldn't have done this without your team's support. As the team prepared to leave the chamber, the weight of their ordeal began to sink in. The asylum, though still a place of dark history, was no longer a conduit for the horrors of Dr. Moreau's experiments. The team had faced unimaginable threats and emerged victorious, but the scars of their battle would remain. Rebecca took one last look at the chamber, its silence a stark contrast to the chaos of earlier. Let's get out of here, she said softly. We've done all we can. With the final confrontation behind them, the team made their way out of the asylum, ready to return to the world outside and leave behind the dark legacy of Dr. Moreau. The horrors they had faced would remain etched in their memories, but they had emerged as survivors, having conquered the darkness that once threatened to consume them.